Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the Tea Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. Here we are on this Wellness Wednesday yet again in this last week of June. It's last full week of June. June is Men's Health Month, and we've been discussing men's mental health awareness. This is also Pride Month. This month, our episodes have featured discussing healthy mental spaces for Black men, um, aspects of healthy fathers, impacts of incarceration on Black men's wellness. And as I alluded to in the first week, I'm also going to address some of the challenges facing trans women and some of the reasons why we struggle, particularly to support Black trans women. So I wanted to get into the why, right? So this is Men's Health Month, and I know you all are thinking, like, what are we doing talking about Black trans women? As we talk about the transition of male to female for particularly a Black trans woman, and how Black trans women are perceived by men, as well as I think, a lot of the identity and wellness aspects. And as we look at constructs such as patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia, like, I just think it's impossible for us not to have this conversation as a part of men's wellness. We talk this month, and you'll, I think, get a little bit more clarity and understanding as we get into it. Um, so trans women have been in the news quite a bit here lately. If you're following discussions about athletics, you know that there have been bans on trans women who are athletes competing, and you're probably even more so no stranger to a very public discussion that started between Riley Gaines, who is a former swimmer, now advocate for women's rights, and then Simone Biles, who is a heavily decorated gymnast. And it followed after Gaines made a criticism. So she essentially made a post about the 2025 4A softball champions who on their team have a trans athlete. And so she essentially said, of course, you're the champions when you have a boy on your team. And we know that we have been seeing a lot of discussions not only about sports, but also in terms of bathrooms, whether that's in the schools or even in Congress. You may remember the very public Republican ban on transgender bathrooms that followed the election of the first openly transgender congressperson, Sarah McBride of Delaware. You also may remember very heated discussions in school board meetings about boys using the girls' bathrooms. It interestingly, female lawmakers didn't even have access to bathrooms near the House chamber until 2011. I digress. There also has been a ban instituted on transgender people serving in the military. The Supreme Court made a decision that trans people are not granted any federal administrative protections in the realm of employment. And though several times the Equality Act has been brought forth to Congress, and the Equality Act is a bill that will provide just more protections for people in the LGBTQ plus community, and it includes requiring prisons to house transgender individuals in facilities that match their gender identity, not their biological or birth gender, and a protection that would allow transgendered people who are incarcerated, who are also 13 more times more likely to experience sexual assault in prison, to be in safe spaces for themselves. So Congress has vetoed that. Um, Additionally, there are federal laws that actually govern, honestly, brutality and misconduct. It encourages it against black trans women, that leads to more violence against trans women and allows them to be more vulnerable. And why is this? Like, why are these things in place? Like, why is this a challenge? Like, why are we having this discussion again? So, there are a lot of statistics. You all know I like to give you some background and information to kind of help navigate this. And people often ask me why I continue to try to provide education about LGBTQ plus IA concerns, particularly given my faith background. And I absolutely will tell you, I feel that it is a responsibility, as a provider as well as someone who is a believer, to provide information. And again, I don't force people to do anything, give you information so you can be informed consumers and be able to look at and think about why certain things exist in the way that they do, in hopes that it will contribute to your wellness. So, according to the National LGBTQ plus task force, black trans people have rate of employment that's 26%, which is twice as high as the unemployment rate for transgender people of all ethnic backgrounds. And it's four times as high as the unemployment rate in the general population. Four times as high. 41% of black trans people have been homeless. And that's more than five times that of the general population. 34% of black trans people have household incomes less than $10,000. Nearly half of the black trans population has attempted suicide. 28 states have dangerous hate crime laws that don't include protections for trans people. What does that mean? Several states recognize what they identify as the trans panic defense, which is a claim that defendant was driven to violence due to their volatile emotional state after discovering that someone is transgender, is a valid legal defense for violence against black trans women. So if you and I were in a relationship and you later found out that I identified as a black trans woman and you killed me, you would be justified in your killing of me, because of your emotional state in learning that I was a black trans woman. Some states are so bad, as a matter of fact, that there have been lists created entitled "Where to Move in the United States If You're Trans." And I know you're thinking, wait, what? I do want you to be clear that none of the states listed on those lists are southern states. And we'll get into the intersection of religion as we talk about the intersection of race and class and gender here in a bit. So, what is it particularly about black trans women? What is it about black males who transition to female, identify as women, that causes such vitriol and hatred in particularly the black community? Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review presented a piece for consideration, and the title of it was America's War on Black Trans Women. Just let that sink in for a minute. America's War on Black Trans Women. Violence against black trans women has been actually probably accurately described as a pandemic within a pandemic. So, starting in about 2016, we noticed some increases in the amount of violence toward black trans women. By the time 2020 hit, and this was during the pandemic, there were six black women, black trans women. They were all under the ages of 32, who were murdered in the span of 9 days. And their deaths, though not by any means the first nor the last, does reflect a horrifying pattern of hate crimes that are committed against transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, and that pattern that has been on the rise, but in particular that most victims are black trans women, and they're typically under the age of 30. So we're talking about, ideally, for the purposes of this discussion, women who black trans women who would be probably in their later teens and 20s, who are making up a population of that dating age, right? Or getting out dating may have been a time of transition for these women where they've transitioned from male to female within that time as legal adults. They might have had some gender affirming care, female presenting. And so this is the population. Black trans women make up the majority of the reported transgender homicide victims. These are the women that are being killed. Many of these murders go unreported or misclassified because what happens with trans women of color is often their deaths are reported in ways that continue to dehumanize them. Their birth names are used, they're misgendered, and they're often held responsible for their own deaths, right? So if we go back to that trans panic defense, you brought this on yourself because you are a man, you're a boy out here pretending you're a woman. And the vitriol, I think a lot of it is present in that piece, that you were born biologically male and you now identify as a woman. And that is where a lot of, honestly, the hatred comes from, a lot of the confusion, a lot of the misunderstanding, a lot of the feelings of anger and rage toward black trans women. Why is that? So let's talk a little bit about why that exists. One, I think as a society, we are incredibly uncomfortable acknowledging violence against transgender people. Some of that has to do with race. Some of it has to do with our own biases. Some of it may have to do with our religious upbringing. Some of it may have to do with the things that we see perpetuated in social media. Some of it may feel as if it's a threat, a personal attack, right, on us. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. The Human Rights Campaign and the Williams Institute at UCLA discuss that the intersections of racism, transphobia, sexism, biphobia, and homophobia are at the heart of why there's such violence and vitriol and hatred toward black trans women. Um, the counter piece is black trans women are often hypersexualized and they're fetishized while simultaneously being seen as deplorable and disposable and a reprehensible and a blight and an abomination. And there have been a lot of depictions, whether it's been Netflix episodes and documentaries or on even hip hop, that have discussed some of the usage of black trans women in videos, and this fantasized hypersexualized view, and how there was this quiet community that where you had to live in spaces that you could not be viewed because outwardly you were viewed by the same people who sexualized you and and had you at the height of their fantasies, also rejected you publicly. The world, I think, tells black trans women in every possible way that they are worthless and they don't deserve protection and that there is no justice for them. The protections for black trans women, for transgender people in general, have now been removed from healthcare, and health insurance. Gender affirming care and treatment has been removed for adolescents. And there has been a lot of honestly, that's probably disinformation about that children 5, 6, and 7 years old are having gender reassignment surgery. That's never been the case. But a lot of the information that's out there that is creating kind of this narrative has been shaped in a way that, again, causes people to think that they are being threatened, that they're at risk, that we're harming children, that children are being exposed to predators, and children are being exposed to things that are distorting their minds, and oftentimes coming from sources that aren't credible, and definitely not from any licensed treatment professionals, nor has it come from a lot of people who have gone through gender affirming care and received gender reassignment surgery. A couple of years back, I interviewed one of the men from my hometown who was transitioning from female to male, and he talked a lot about the journey and growing up in our very small uh, town in Mississippi, and the religious underpinnings and the effects on even his family, and some of the vitriol he received, and a lot of the misunderstood and misdirected comments about what must have happened to him. And he must have been sexually traumatized in some way to get there, and the prayers for his soul, if you will. So what unfortunately happens is when trans people, and in this particular case, trans women of color do seek help, they're frequently rejected. There's hostility from social service workers. People refuse to support them. And what we see happening is when I'm in a position where I don't have a lot of resources, then of course survival is going to become my primary goal. Like, how do I stay alive? How do I get a chance to exist and live to see another day? And because we recognize, if you remember those stats I gave you earlier, that there is absolutely the presence of systemic discrimination in employment, then many black trans women are forced into what we call underground economies, and that included sex work in order for them to be able to survive, because sex always sells, and a lot of women feel as if sex is the commodity that they will always have, that will allow them to be able to survive when they can't survive in other ways. And because sex work has been criminalized, and we also talked about like those high rates of poverty in black trans women, it puts them at further risk to now be susceptible to violence, because now I'm looking to someone to help me be able to survive and exist. That could be a pimp, that could be a person who is a predator, that could be someone who is abusive, that could be someone who is trying to drug me up, who is trying to put me in unsafe conditions, right? And so this marginalized status now puts you at risk for law enforcement to intervene, and they're often not going to protect black trans women, particularly those who have been identified as sex workers, those who live in impoverished communities, those who have been, on the outskirts of society, and who are, again, considered a blight on humanity. And I will tell you that black women in general have the highest rate of intimate partner violence. And then as you look specifically at black women who are killed in the United States, they are often murdered by men, men that they know, and 9 out of 10 times those men are black, right? And so when you were wondering before about black men's wellness, and the tie-in for this is where it is, about the violence toward black women, the violence toward black trans women, and how that is affecting black men's health and wellness. And I will also tell you that it's not just black men, nor are all black men violent. So let me absolutely go on record and say that two things can be true at the same time, right? Those percentages are true, and it is also true that there are absolutely black men out who honor and love and support black women, and there are also black men who are trans affirming. But what I will say is that both black men and women have internalized a value system that dehumanizes black women, and particularly when it comes to black women and our basic body autonomy, and also black trans women. And most people will tell you that there is definitely a social media presence where black cis women, so those women whose birth, their gender at the time of their birth matches their gender identity. So born a woman, identify as a woman. That oftentimes, because of, again, these intersections of misogyny and these intersections of patriarchy, a lot of black women feel like one of the few privileges that they have is their heterosexuality. And so they look at black trans women as a threat to that. Like, I don't get a lot. And so here you are encroaching on a territory that's mine where I feel safe, right? And these are some of the discussions, even if you're looking at some of the women who are anti trans athletes competing with women, is that's what they're saying. We're trying to protect women. Where there's an attack on femininity, there is an attack on women. And so oftentimes the argument is that trans women are attacking women. And so that is why you will see often black women saying very harsh negative things about black trans women, and why it feels like there's the split and there's the divide. Um, I think also black women feel as if, in general, there are not a lot of options, or not the same amount of options, I should say that in that way, for dating. For black women as there are for other ethnic groups. And so black women feel as if they may either be only interested in black men, or they may only feel as if black men are expressing interest in them. And so they don't want to give that up. And so they're often, I think, reluctant to say anything, to advocate, to ask questions, to be informed, because the stay in the place mentality. Let me not rock the boat. I don't want to put myself in a position where I could be cut off. And so I'm not going to, even if it does bother me, I'm not going to say anything about it. Or I may be even more loud in my opposition toward it if I feel like that's going to help keep me safe, keep me protected, give me what I need, establish my ability to be able to have viable partners. Then I will also say there's the church component, right? And the church is divided on trans rights and equality. Um, on the one side, many believers have been taught that homosexuality and gender diversity are against Christian teachings. They're against God, Jehovah, whoever it is in whom you believe. That there's only male and there's female, and those males and females are straight. They are not LGBTQ plus IA. They believe that it is possible to love someone and not affirm them, that those are different things. And so you hear the love the sinner, not the sin. And so there's often that separation. I can love you, person, and tell you you're wrong, and you're going to hell. And that's not of God. They believe that gender affirming care is actually harmful. And the Vatican actually made a statement that it is a violation of human dignity. They see gender affirming care as right there with abortions and euthanasia, that is going against the will of God. They also believe that supporting gender identities teaches children lies, and it's assault on God's order. Like, nope. So we're not going to tell them that. Much like I'm not going to tell you Santa Claus is real, because that's not. That's a myth, right? So in their minds, to perpetuate this affirmation goes against the value system that they would want to impart on young people, and they feel an obligation to speak up about it, and that everyone else is existing in this fine line, the straddling of the fence and that they're not being true to honoring God's word. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is believers who believe that the scripture um, points to God's heart, and that the desire has always been to love and support all of God's children, to create safe spaces, to offer hope, to ensure that we are advocates for people who have been marginalized and treated unfairly, and that it is the love of God that separates us from those who aren't Christian, that we are able to engage in loving behaviors. And they believe that parents and trained professionals ought to be the ones navigating decisions about how people navigate their gender identities and receive gender affirming care, not the church, not state, not the federal government. Um, these affirming faith leaders also really believe in the prophet Micah's words. What does the Lord require of us? To be just, to be kind, and to walk humbly, and that to not be an advocate suggests opposite of what it is that God wants for believers, and that one cannot say one loves God and whom and what God created, and express a lack of acceptance and at times outright rejection of God's children. So, where does that leave us? I know it leaves a lot, right? So, what does it mean to look well? What does it mean to be healthy in these spaces, men? And I think I will leave you with this, and also for anyone who is listening and trying to navigate all of those different things, right? As you talk about where do your faith beliefs measure up? Where does your desire for equality and access and humanity and decency and support lie? Like where does that leave you with your value system and what you want to teach your children and how you want to walk? I will say to you that it's always important to get a lot of information so you can make the most informed decision that you can make. And I'm going to give you some resources that will allow you to be able to do that. So what this section will focus on is what support looks like. There is a Black Trans Lives Matter platform, and one of the goals is to change the treatment of Black trans people, especially women in America, not only by us, brothers and sisters, but also the government. And they advocate for the federal government to reinstate the healthcare protections that were in place for trans people and for state governments to eliminate things such as the trans panic defense. They encourage extending protections to sex workers, which may include decriminalizing sex work. Enacting stronger police brutality laws so that when police are violent and aggressive towards trans people, that they're held accountable for those behaviors, and also that incarcerated people are allowed to live in housing that matches their gender identity. And often people will say, even if you create a space that's just for trans women, then in these spaces, in a women's prison, and allow them to be in that space, that's still keeping them separated if you have some concerns about that, but also giving them a safe space where they're less likely to be victimized because they're also amongst other women. Um, Also, I think it's just important to learn more about, do some volunteering, even donate to organizations that provide resources for trans women of color. There's the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. There's the For the Gwirls, GWORLS. There's the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, the Black Trans Advocacy Coalition, the Transgender Law Center, and just kind of understanding the laws and how they impact people and understanding the perspectives of different people. Like, I think sometimes we can be in spaces where we only have a limited perspective that might have been influenced by how we grew up and what we saw around us. And sometimes we just need a little bit more information to understand the humanity in people. I think it's important for us to share, amplify the voices of our activists, share their work, follow them, lift up stories, challenge misinformation and disinformation. We say speak up, right? We're in this culture of wanting people to speak up, to not allow people to be bullied and mistreated in your presence, even if you don't fully understand or affirm their experience. But what you can relate to is that no one should be mistreated. And bullied, right, and denied the basic things that they need. I think that it's also important that we hold our media accountable. We talked about when Black trans women are killed, they're often mislabeled, but also they don't receive coverage. They are not on the news. Even if you just look at Black women and girls in general, like the coverage for missing Black women and girls is not the same as it is for other ethnic groups. And often, in addition to misgendering people, like we sensationalize the deaths of trans women. And so it still it dishonors them, and it doesn't protect other trans women, and it doesn't decrease the likelihood that there will be violence, and it doesn't put things in place that will allow trans people to be safe, which is why that media coverage needs to be present. It needs to be fair and good journalism, but also that we hold our elected officials accountable. We want to advocate for policies that protect transgender people. We want to get that Equality Act passed in Congress. We want to be able to be allies, be visible allies, knowing that trans people are often underemployed and unemployed. Like, advocate for trans people in your workplace, and not that means you have to say, hey, let's only hire trans people, because I think sometimes we live in that space of it's either or, not a both and. But when we see people being mistreated in our workplace, when we see people being mistreated in our communities, when we see people being mistreated in our families, our support can save their lives. We talked about the high suicide rates in addition to the violence. And often that's because people feel hopeless and they don't feel loved and they don't feel protected and they don't feel safe. And so there ought to be safe spaces for people to be in, at the very least, when they're around us. We're well, and we want people around us to be well. Um, and I will say, for my fellow believers, it's important that we create safe spaces in our faith-based communities. Bring in professionals and advocates that can share information. Have a resource list of culturally appropriate and responsive care providers. You don't have to give advice, affirm, do anything, but what you can say is, hey, I have some trusted folks who you can talk to be able to navigate that. And what I'm going to do is make sure that when you're in this space, you're safe, and that you have a church family who advocates for you and wants you around. Um, I think it's important that we just recognize the worth and value of all Black women, but particularly we understand that includes Black trans women. That it's not, I advocate and respect women, but I don't consider you Black trans woman as a woman, and so you don't get that same respect. You don't get those same rights. I think we have that's a dangerous theology. We have to be very mindful about selective outrage and selective protection. And if we want people to be well and we want them to be safe, that means that we have to do things that allows all people to be well and to be safe. So as we close out this month of men's mental health and men's health awareness and pride, I do encourage you to do some work on challenging some of your stereotypes and biases, supporting things that are going to allow you to be healthy. Go to those doctor's appointments, have your support care team, acknowledge and don't avoid things. I lost one of my favorite church members. He was just as ornery and mean, and difficult as he could be. And he died from cancer, and he didn't address it, and he didn't follow the treatment recommendations. And I think pride got in the way of him being able to accept that he needed to address some things. And so by the time he did, it was too late. And I was very upset with him that I didn't get a chance to tell him goodbye. And I do not like funerals or dead bodies at all. But I very much went to the viewing and let him have it one last time. So I want you all to be healthy men. I want you to be well. I want you to have safe spaces for you to be able to process your mental and emotional needs. I want you to make space to grieve. I want you to make space to focus on your wellness and be intentional about your care. I want you to challenge some of the things that you have been taught about what it means to be weak as a man, also what it means to be a man and a father and a husband, and just a well man. And that in this month and in every month, you do your very, very best to be well. I will be taking a break in July, so I will see you all in August.